how to make your contract language and marketing materials inclusive of the LGBTQ community today on the podcast.
This is the Wedding Industry Law Podcast, a podcast dedicated to wedding professionals that are just trying to keep it legal. And now, your host, Rob Shank.
Hello out there. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Rob, and I'll be your host for today's episode. I think we have a terrific episode in terms of content, but first, call to action. I would love it if you guys could go over to my YouTube channel, subscribe to that YouTube channel, leave a comment if you like. I am looking to get 1,000 subscribers. I am at only about a measly 186 subscribers. So I'm kind of far from my goal. So if you can go over there and help, you don't have to watch anything, just subscribe. I'm not asking for a whole lot. So if you could do that, that'd be fantastic. Follow me on Instagram. As always, if you have any suggestions or comments about the content of the Wedding Industry Law Podcast, reach out to me on Instagram or YouTube. I love suggestions, and if it's a good suggestion or if it's a bad suggestion, I'll incorporate it and make it into an episode. So please like and subscribe. We have an awesome episode for you today. We're going to be talking all about LGBTQ inclusivity with regard to contract language, marketing materials, and business practices, and what we can do as wedding professionals to be more inclusive of those groups. But we are not doing that alone. I definitely need some help. I'm a cisgender Caucasian dude from Mount Juliet, Tennessee. So I need all the help I can get with this. So I'm not doing it by myself. We are going to have an expert. In fact, by my research, the first guest that I've ever had on this program that has a Wikipedia entry. And I'm talking about none other than Kathryn Hamm. Kathryn Ham, for those that don't know, is an educator. She is a speaker and consults with wedding professionals about same-sex wedding trends, best practices when serving today's couples, and how to think outside the box when considering the modern market. She is an author of a critically acclaimed book called The Art of Capturing Love, The Essential Guide to Lesbian and Gay Wedding Photography. By way of a little bit of a background, her mother started gayweddings.com in 1999, which was the pioneering online wedding planning resource for same-sex couples. Kathryn helped her mom with that until it was acquired by Wedding Wire in 2015. Nowadays, she is a dynamic small business development consultant and marketing advisor, and is an education expert and diversity inclusion specialist for Wedding Wire and The Knot. I believe Wedding Pro now is what that is. So I will have links to her book, which is fantastic, in the show notes, as well as a couple of resources that we're going to talk about later on in the episode. But so happy to have Kathryn here. Kathryn, welcome to the show.
Hi, Rob. So great to be here.
Oh man, I am so happy that you are on the show. I'm one of your big fans. I've been a big fan. I talked at the top of the show about how I've seen you speak at the Wedding MBA, among other places, and how it's very inspirational. I know that, and what's funny, in preparation for this, I looked at my old notes, and I just saw like where I put "trying not to cry," and just inspirational. So
I love it.
It's fantastic that you came on the show, and especially since we recently had that Supreme Court decision, and I think it's just important for everybody to kind of step back, do a self-analysis of how we can be inclusive of the LGBTQ community. And you're the one that I want to have do that again, based on having seen you before. So the one stat that I remember from a presentation, this was, I think, 2016. Okay. So in 2015, but it's from 2016.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that you kind of framed it as, why should we care? First of all, we should care as human beings about one another, but from a bottom line standpoint, why should a wedding professional care?
Right.
Is, you said that over 50%, and this was 2016, so it's probably higher than this, but over 50% of opposite sex couples rate inclusivity of LGBTQ persons important enough to make that a material decision when picking a wedding professional. So this is not just, well, I don't do LGBTQ weddings.
Right.
No, ma'am. This is now everybody's issue, to the extent that it should have been everybody's issue. It's definitely now. So that's why this conversation is important. One of the reasons why this is important.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, Kathryn, if a wedding professional has their contract in front of you, what are some of the starting points in terms of language that can make that contract more inclusive of
Right.
LGBTQ?
Right. You know what? First in your intro when you talked about trying not to cry, I love that because I also do data-heavy presentations. So that's great if I could deliver statistics and some emotional and heart of the issue around this. That is great praise. You are right that that number is higher. And in fact, I did some research, which folks can find on my my website, madebyKathryn.com, where I believe I want to say it was 72% of folks surveyed said that they make choices based on businesses being inclusive. And, you know, one of the other ways to look at this, and this really matters relative to the wedding industry, is while of course people may get married later in life or may have a second marriage, we're really talking about a younger demographic. And that younger demographic, millennials, our Z generation, they don't think the way we do. You know, a lot of us have had to unlearn the boomers, the Gen Xers, which is my generation. Young folks today, they are coming at this from a place of assumption of inclusivity. And they will, to your point, make a decision based on a wedding vendor's comfort and openness and signals around that. Many straight couples, in fact, have LGBTQ identified folks in their family, in their weddings, amongst their guests. And so they want to know that they're taking care of all of their friends and family. So with regard to contracts and actually I'm really glad we're having this conversation right now because I bet in light of the coronavirus, there are a lot of wedding professionals out there revisiting their contracts. And I would encourage folks to revisit their contracts every year anyway, but I know many folks are digging back in to try to figure out about their force majeure around what can we do with this postponement. While you're going through all of that and rethinking it, let's add that layer of inclusivity in terms of thinking about potential audiences. So language is really the big deal here. Most simply put, it's really important to make sure you have space for a partner one, a partner two, or a bride and a bride, or a groom and a groom, rather than just assuming it's a bride and a groom in that contract if they're both signing it. And I would also add a piece around gender. Depending on if it's an online contract or inquiry form where people might have a drop-down menu and have male or female, it would be important to add non-binary, or some folks might go by X or other, but it's also important to be inclusive around gender. Since you and I last spoke, this is probably the biggest change is the centering more of the conversation around a breadth of how members of the LGBTQ community might identify relative to their gender. Young folks, they are much more broad and elastic in their thinking. Sure. They may identify as gender queer or gender non-conforming or non-binary, all of these terms that may be highly personal. But if you're looking to serve the LGBTQ community, it's important that you educate yourself and build some muscle around those terms and how we might be referring to ourselves.
That makes sense. So if I understand correctly, like one of the mission critical things to do is to scrub from your contract language, bride and groom. Mm-hmm. It should be, I think you said client or you know, partner. And what did you use before we went on the air? Soon to be wed? Like what's?
Well, I often will say you could talk about engaged couples. That's right.
Engaged couples. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then can you speak a little bit more, and this is coming from like, it's such a different world for me because I'm licensed in several, and this is an example, this is probably going to be a long-winded example of this, but talking about the gender terms, but I'm a member of different bars across mm-hmm. the country. So in mm-hmm. Georgia, when you're filling out your yearly application, it's basically they show you a picture of Burt Reynolds and a picture of Lonnie Anderson and go, which one of these posters do you have hanging in your room? And the one in California is I have to have there's a list of 100 different terms of what I identify as. And so I'm confused. So mm-hmm. I guess a long way of saying, how can somebody that's not familiar with gender terms like that
Mhm.
What are some resources, or what are
Mhm.
some ways that we can
Mhm.
become better educated about that?
Right. So, a little bit self-promoting, but I know it's reliable. I wrote a book with a photographer called The New Art of Capturing Love, and we have a glossary in the back to help with a little bit of that.
Oh, fantastic.
You can go look at something if some of your wedding professionals, let's say, for example, are on Facebook and they're doing advertising on Facebook, or they're setting up their about information. You can often look in that gender related drop down and see what terms they're using. I would just say anytime you encounter something like that, make a note of the term and look it up, right?
I see.
There are some folks who may have a term that they use and it is very important to them and they want to be acknowledged in that way, but it may not be a term that's most inclusive relative to how, let's say, gender nonconforming folks might be, or for folks who might have something that's much more of, let's say, a typical, they might say, I identify as male or female, but there is a broader gender expression that they might offer. So for those who are new to this, it can feel overwhelming and exhausting. And I think for many, there's some fearfulness about messing up. And what I would say is if we can sit with the concern, that's new information, not panic. And if we're in a live conversation, ask a follow up question, help me understand more, tell me more about that. Use those words back. But later and on your own time, spend some time looking into that. Looking at out.com or the advocate, finding LGBTQ sources is a great way. The Human Rights Campaign website has a lot of great information. If you read a little bit, you can find a lot of information to understand the breadth of those terms. And I would say overdoing it, if you're based in the South and you're trying to replicate what's happening in San Francisco and you don't understand all that language, that's going to backfire, right? What you're doing needs to be authentic to you and your messaging. It needs to be inclusive and it needs to be mindful of your client. So if you don't fully understand it and you're going to break out in a cold sweat when you use the term, you need to go do some work and figure that out and understand it and figure out what you need to incorporate so that you're not breaking out into a cold sweat and
Right.
have time
Yeah,
to be connecting with that client.
that makes sense. Okay, and Kathryn, another example that you gave in that presentation that literally sticks out in my mind, and this is along the lines of this contract language.
Mm,
And we might be moving into marketing, but
mhm,
by way of example, a venue might have a room in which the typically the bride would get ready, and then
mhm,
a room in which the groom would get ready, and we name these rooms like the gentleman's room, or
mhm,
you know the pink room. um,
mhm,
can you speak to, it's not just a contract, but perhaps
mhm.
gender and sexual identity and sexual orientation in your marketing and your practices as well? Can you kind of speak to that as well?
Yeah. Well, this is another reason that writing the book, The New Art of Capturing Love, really helped me to understand this in a way that I hadn't grasped previously, even though it's so obvious. But the wedding industry is super gendered. It is an industry built around the assumption of there's going to be a tux and a dress, and everything flows from that. And there are gender roles. And in photography, in the book, we break down, for example, poses that folks get put into that are reflective of a certain gender role. This is the tall, strong one. This is the feminine, I need your help, let me lean into you one, generally associated with male, female, masculine, feminine. So the same thing pervades some of our wedding traditions, our marketing, the way we think about it. And then you add to it that traditionally speaking, the wedding was built around the woman. It's really all about the bride. And as I've always said, like, and the wedding industry knows this, grooms are often treated like props. So if there's not a lot of room for men to have a central role in their own wedding tradition and their own wedding ritual, where is there space for two grooms? And where is there space for a couple of two people? So they might, for example, have two getting ready rooms that are the same size, that aren't overly gendered. I think it serves straight couples, but I think it also serves LGBTQ couples. So there is everything from who walks into the room first and with what flourish, who needs an escort down the aisle, who gets what room and how big it needs to be. It is the heteronormativity and the gendered connection to wedding ritual informs the process. And it's so deeply ingrained that we don't normally think about it. So when we're thinking about inclusion, what's really important is just to back all the way out of it, whether it's your contracts, if you're a venue, it's your facility, or if it's the questions you ask a couple, back yourself out and ask what gender bias might be in this question. And for those who are like, hey, this needs to be bride-groom and we're all about it, whether it's the couple or it's the wedding professional, that's fine. There's no problem. My thing is, let people choose what they want to do, right? If a couple wants to go all in on the masculine and feminine components of the ritual, fantastic. But if you're looking to welcome others into your practice, you need to be able to send those cues that you understand there are more ways to do it. And you need to have enough comfort with it that you can help lead them through whatever your role might be in the wedding day. And so it's really just unpacking the assumptions and the rituals to look at that. I hope that's helpful. I know that's still really vague.
No. I mean, that makes sense. I guess as I'm hearing it, it's almost like, okay, that's a starting point and that's good.
Mm-hmm.
So like in practice, I guess, what are some things that I can keep in mind, or the wedding professional can keep in mind in terms of that? So like, asking open-ended questions, like you
Mm-hmm.
said before, like that's something that I can sink my teeth into.
Yeah.
Right. But you're right. The idea is like, the heteronormative standard, like that's ingrained in me, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
scared.
Right.
I don't set out to offend somebody.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, a lot of people don't, but I
Right.
end up doing that when I do
Right.
say these things. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like,
Right. Let me give you a story that I may have actually told from the stump there when we saw each other at Wedding MBA.
please,
But
let's
to
do it.
me, so the story for me represents some of how we're all struggling to, and maybe less so now, but we're all struggling to move into this new world and to let go of some of the things that we've been trained to expect. I was actually not working the wedding. It was a friend's wedding, 2 women. For their rehearsal dinner, one wore pants and one wore a dress, and then they switched it up for their wedding. I can't remember, they had a whole process by which they figured that out. But when it came time for the wedding ritual, and this was a wonderful, beautiful, historic church in Hudson Valley, and they had a wedding planner who'd been helping them with so much of it. When it came time for the couple to enter, and it was a single aisle, so that set up some of what would happen, the guests and the wedding planner were all in sort of an automatic script about what would happen. It turns out that they sent the bride wearing the pants in first. She was escorted by, I believe, both of her parents, but they sent her in first. And it wasn't because she was wearing pants. It was because they had drawn straws, I guess, that her partner was too nervous about it. So she walked in first. As a result of the music, as a result of the crowd not being sure what to do, all the guests, people sort of remained seated until a couple people started to cue standing for this partner. She came down the aisle a bit. They closed the doors after her. And then there was a huge big reveal as the music crescendoed and in walks the bride in the gown with her dad. And then people all understood, we stand up. So as I waited to get through the party before I said, hey, I have to revisit this. I'm really curious to know how that went. Was that on purpose? What happened? The brides revealed to me they were really upset about how that had gone, because it ended up feeling like only one of them was being recognized and celebrated. And when they addressed that with the wedding planner blew it off, didn't take responsibility for it, hadn't anticipated it. And the couple felt it disrupted their happiness with her services, because the wedding planner couldn't hear the feedback. The wedding planner didn't anticipate that this would happen. And in the end, they had what for them felt like a stilted entry, because they both felt, well, we're both coming into the space, and this is bride aside. The couple, I think, can each be recognized. And if it's a male-female, why is it that only the female gets recognized, right?
Right.
So just an example of the guests not understanding what to do, of how the music played into that, of how the wedding planner didn't have the questions with the couple in advance, and even the couple wasn't sure what to do or what that might look like, that when it was go time, everybody did what they know how to do. And the
And
couple in the end was, I mean, it was a
ended up
beautiful
being,
wedding, but they were really bummed. They were
yeah,
really bummed.
yeah, because I could see how that could be extremely offensive. So that's a perfect example. Okay, so let me try to unpack that then.
Yeah.
So in that instance, it seems to me that the planner blew it because the planner received the feedback that she or he could have acted on.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take it from a standpoint of you're the wedding professional, Kathryn, and these are your clients, and
Mm-hmm.
y'all are sitting down for the first time. How would you ask that open-ended question to get to avoid the situation that you just spoke about? And we'll
Right.
just leave it at the entrance
Right.
of the
Right.
couples.
Right. Well, part of the first is, let me just acknowledge how hard it is to be in the wedding business. The job of
Everybody's
wedding,
giving you a standing ovation right now,
I
Kathryn.
mean, well, I have to say, this is one of the things that when I speak with folks out there, uh, the stuff I hear people say when they don't think a wedding professional is listening, it's hard to take because I don't think people really appreciate the work that goes in behind the scenes and the knowledge that contributes to a successful event. And I get why that can be, but I'll tell you one thing I would never do is be a wedding photographer. Having learned enough about that, wow. So let me first acknowledge that you've got to do a lot of work. You have to keep the trains running on time and everybody's got to look great. So there are a lot of expectations and the person you think is your client maybe isn't your client. So it's very complicated. So that said, one of the areas that I would like to see wedding professionals really step it up is in looking at, even with the pressures of time that they face for an event, to back off to review the steps they normally take and ask themselves which shortcuts could potentially be problematic for you. So one of those might be asking the question for the couple, let's talk about, now this is more for wedding planners or maybe the DJ or the musicians, perhaps someone who's officiating, step back and start by saying, tell me what you envision about your ceremony. So an open-ended question, they might tell you something like, this is what I'm going to want to wear, or here's who's going to sit in the front row, or I don't want anyone to look at me. Who knows what they have to say? And I just would spend some time asking them to free associate that. You can then end up getting into the mechanics, like if the building has, because it's, let's say, a church, for example, if it has only one aisle, you're going to need to ask questions like, well, we have an entry point of one center aisle, or maybe we have 3 aisles, or maybe it's, we're going to set some chairs up. What's the formation that you'd like to put them in? What do you envision? Now, normally this piece is going to dictate what happens next. How do people get there? And from there, this is where asking open-ended questions of the couple, you might find out whether or not they're comfortable with parents participating. Will the parents be there? Do they expect the parents to participate in that part? Do they want to do something incredibly non-traditional? Or is it a couple that wants to do this by the book, bride-groom style? All of that is possible. And rather than making that decision for the couple, asking for as long as you can, as many open-ended questions that let them paint the story is going to help you understand how they're thinking about it.
I think
And
that,
I will tell you, so a lot of couples, they don't know what they want.
right.
And this is where the wedding professional's advice and expertise is super important. But instead of saying, here's how you're going to do it, it may be better to say, here are some ways I've seen this done. Oftentimes we do it this way. Some couples tell me they're comfortable entering the space or exiting the space this way. How does that resonate for you? How does that sit with you?
That actually that opens up my world. That I can sink my teeth into. I understand that. Like, Rob, ask open-ended questions. I understand that, but from a practical standpoint, when you say,
Right.
how do you envision parent participation? Okay, that's something. That's an open-ended question that I understand and
Right.
why we're asking it and where we're going to get to.
Right.
As opposed to, hey, is your mom around to walk you down the aisle? Well, that might be something they want, right? So,
Right.
no, that makes so much sense to me now.
Right.
What do you envision? What are you wanting from XYZ portion of the ceremony?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
I'll tell you a couple more stories from the book that were illustrative and really helped me.
Yep.
One photographer who was featured in the book, and I've heard other folks using this technique now. She would say to a couple, any couple, whether it's a straight couple, a queer couple, whatever the case may be, she would know, she'd have a pose in mind, and she'd say, I want one of you here and I want one of you here. And then she would step back and let the couple kind of come together however they were going to pose on whoever went here and whoever went here. And then as they sort of would connect in together, she would then pose them and build off of that authentic connection based on where they each stepped in. I thought that was such a beautiful example of an open-ended invitation.
Right.
Another friend sat in on a book talk, and she's straight and married, and she brought a friend of hers who's straight and is married. And at the end of the talk, she said to me, Kathryn, I'm rethinking my wedding album. I said, I'm not sure I understand. And her friend said, oh my God, me too. She said, I can only think of one time in my life I've ever sat on my husband's lap, and it is on my wedding day because that's what the photographer told me to do. And she's just like, oh my God, why did I do that? And why do we have that weird picture?
Right.
And it is just an encapsulated example of how easy it is for that to happen. Photographers work from a set of poses that they use. If you look at them long enough, you see the same pose. That can be inauthentic and not organic to any couple, regardless of their gender pairing. So this can apply for caterers and how things are served. It can impact what it's like as you come down the aisle. You might think about it relative to the flowers that you pick. I've seen photographs where a bridesman actually is carrying a bouquet to match the rest of the wedding party because they think it's fun and they loved playing with it. So if a florist refused to make a bouquet for a guy who's serving as a bridesman, they've missed an opportunity if he was happy to play with that and the wedding party thought that would be fun.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, this is so much to take in. This is fantastic. My mind is blown. Just as we get towards the end of the episode, can you kind of talk about visuals in marketing and how to be inclusive in visuals and what's important and how we should, how to achieve that goal of inclusivity?
Yeah. So the good news is, in many respects, we're better off now than we were like 10 or 15 years ago, where it was much harder to find same-sex couples represented or genderqueer couples represented, or frankly, diversity in all its forms. We were usually just looking at one white, thin blonde bride, right. And the industry has really changed for the better. That includes stock imagery, which can be a tool, but can backfire if you're using the same photo that everyone else is. I think you also can fall into the danger of just finding a photo and using it, but it feels inauthentic because it's not a photo that is connected to your services, for example, or perhaps it is a staged photo that doesn't really feel like an authentic moment. Well, you can still use some of these photos to indicate your inclusivity. But if you're using a photo of a gay male couple from 2004, it's going to look out of date like it would if you were using a straight couple for 2004, right? So there are all sorts of ways to improvise with this, to connect with other wedding professionals, to figure out how you might include imagery that is inclusive. And I also want to add, so I talk a lot more than just LGBTQ couples right now around inclusion. We have so much work to do relative to equity and inclusion in the industry, and to include folks, wedding professionals, couples who are not white. I think as folks take this opportunity to revisit what imagery might be in their brochures, in their website, the language in the names of their companies, be thinking about who this speaks to and who it doesn't speak to. Because if you've got a website that's all white brides, lesbian brides aren't necessarily going to feel any more included in that circumstance.
Kathryn, this has been fantastic, and I just want to let you know. And I've told you this before. I think if you're out, you meet a million people, but anyway, I'm just some schlub. But I remember being one of the reasons why I was so inspired, and what almost brought me to tears, is that generally, when people do me wrong, I want to destroy them. Like I'm trying to like my natural tendency, and I got to go to therapy or something, is to hate and to like, attack, react. Okay. And so what I thought was inspiring was the fact that you've been fighting this fight for a long time before it was cool, before people were doing it. You lived this life, and your message was always love and understanding of the person that's doing the offending, doing the oppressing. You go out of your way to try to put yourself in the mindset of the professional that's not inclusive, that wants to be inclusive. And I thought, because that's not my natural tendency. That's not many people's natural tendency. And that's why, we should aspire to be people like you, where, hey, I have every right to be angry. I've got every right to react, but I'm not. I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to try to overcome these obstacles in the society with love. And that's impressive. And I don't know, like that's what, I guess because that's my failing is that I'm so angry all the time that you did this with love. I won't ever forget that. Like I remember being like, holy cow, she's such a good person. I'm a terrible person. But anyway,
I would encourage you not to be so hard on yourself. We all struggle.
Right.
Some days are harder than others. Yeah. And I have found myself, particularly lately, trying to take my own advice because this is a challenging time. And, when I'm struggling the most, but I'm most able to catch myself, I try to end up being curious about how this person got here. I try to be curious about what it is that matters to them. The good news about doing this work in the wedding industry is that the whole deal is supposed to be about love.
Right.
Right? So if that is our fundamental assumption, and we all are in it for the same reason, which is supporting a couple who's madly in love and wants to live together and have a wonderful, fulfilled life, maybe have kids and do whatever they want to do together as a couple, as a team, we have a lot of shared agreement in that. And I find sometimes as long as I can stay there, we get to the fringes where maybe we have some legal difference of opinion, some religious difference of opinion. And it's hard. People have said some things to me that hurt. I wish that it wasn't so easy to say anti-gay things in a public platform the way it is, because that stuff does sting. But I really do believe that if we can provide space for one another, we can figure out how to sort of get across the bridge, because we're all in this together. That's the bottom line. We are. And I also want to say, I honor and appreciate your anger and indignity. You're wanting to be frustrated about it, because the fact that you're willing to say very clearly, this is not right, this is not okay, it allows me to also say, let me offer a little more generous space.
So Kathryn, before we sign off here, how can people get a hold of you, or what are some references that people are interested in what you're talking about, where they can get more information?
Sure. Two primary places. One is I'm still working with the Knot and Wedding Wire as a wedding educator on the Wedding Pro brand. So you can often find some of my content, or at least content that I've helped to inform on all of these topics and more. I also have a new website, which is madebykathrin.com, Kathryn, as I have expanded my consulting services, doing small business consulting, website support, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, freelance writing. That's a great way to send me a note if you want to reach out and you have questions, or you're curious a little bit more about me and what I'm doing. I'm on Twitter a lot these days. That's where I get my breaking news. So you're welcome to look for me there as well, and send a direct message if you like.
Sounds good. Kathryn, thank you again for coming on the program.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it.
I hope that you found this episode informative. I know that I sure did. I have a lot to learn about many things, particularly this subject matter. But if you are enjoying the content of these episodes, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Go to YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember that my YouTube channel is not just this podcast, but other videos. So you'll get even more education, just like what you got today. If you subscribe to that YouTube, hit the notification bell. If you have any comments or suggestions about what I should talk about on future episodes, reach out to me, let me know. Follow me on Instagram, do all those things. I would be much appreciative of you if you did that. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wedding Industry Law Podcast. This podcast is intended for general information only. Nothing in this podcast is intended to be legal advice. Do not rely on this podcast for your legal matter. Instead, consult an attorney in your area. Thanks, obrigada, até semana que vem.